Good evening, friends. Shavua Tov. We are at night 23 in the Elul Screen challenge. My apologies, I missed last night 22. As I passed out, I was just so exhausted. So we missed night 22. My apologies for those who are following along. But here we are, night 23. Reading passages from Avodat Hashem and our work. And we are now on page 39. Spiritual reality is a state of absolute perfection. Spiritual reality is a state of absolute perfection. So this is totally right line consciousness. This is non-duality consciousness. And it's pretty straightforward, right? When we connect with the state of spiritual consciousness, of spiritual reality, the reality itself, the reality of spirituality, the spiritual realm or the spiritual reality is absolute perfection. It is that because it is in total union with the divine. There is nothing lacking. There is no, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing broken. It's all a complete, total perfection, total absolute perfection. It's this state which transcends all of our left line, brokenness, or galut, exile reality. So it's an exalted or transcendent state, but it is the underlying unity. It is the true spiritual reality underneath all of our finite existence. And it's one leg, right? It's the right line, Kav Yamin. So in that Kav Yamin, spiritual reality is a state of absolute perfection. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to work on. There's nothing to fix. It's all perfect, just as it is, all in its unity and its glory. Not only is the revelation relative to the hiddenness, but the hiddenness is the revelation itself. Not only is the revelation relative to the hiddenness, but the hiddenness is the revelation itself. During times of hiddenness, we need to nullify our ego to serve God in happiness. This state of divine service and connection to God in prayer is the revelation. During times of hiddenness, we need to nullify our ego to serve God in happiness. This state of divine service and connection to God in prayer is the revelation. This state of divine service and connection to God in prayer is the revelation. So what does it mean, the revelation? The revelation is the revelation of God's unity, the revelation of God's plan, the revelation of God's love and the perfection, the right line. It's the revelation of the hidden unity within all of existence. And the revelation is relative to the hiddenness, right? So what is hidden has yet to be revealed. The more that is revealed, the less is hidden. So the revelation is relative to the hiddenness. But the hiddenness is the revelation itself. How is the hiddenness the revelation itself? Well, the hiddenness is part of the revelation because it is It is this aspect of God's plan that is expressed in the hiddenness. And if it wasn't hidden, then we would not have revelation. There would be no such thing as revelation, because it would all be revelation. It would all be already revealed. So if nothing is hidden, nothing can be revealed. And he goes on to say, to clarify, right, during times of hiddenness, which is this reality, the reality of galut, of exile, where things do not seem like there's a unity running throughout, but the exact opposite, especially in our times of polarization, massive polarization. During times of hiddenness, we need to nullify our ego to serve God in happiness. Meaning, we need to nullify those parts of us that rebel against the way life is unfolding, and that rebel against that fight against the idea of divine union. That say, how can there be divine union? I don't see divine union. I don't feel God's presence. I don't feel the revelation. So during those times, our times now, for most of us, we need to nullify that ego, that sense, that identity, that self that says, I don't feel God, so I don't believe in God. I don't feel Hashem Echad. I don't feel the unity within all creation and existence. So I don't believe, and I don't live in the way that I would if I believed and felt God, or if God was revealed to me. So we need to nullify our ego to serve God in happiness. We need to kind of push through that need for the revelation in order to serve God in happiness through emunah, right? Through this embodied faith. Even if we don't feel it, even if it's not revealed, we still serve God in happiness. Exalted, a very high level. This state of divine service, this exalted high level state of divine service and connection to God in prayer is the revelation, right? So when we actually burn through our need for it to be revealed, our need for us to see and feel God and serve God anyway, and connect to God in prayer anyway, to reach out to God or to praise God, even if we don't feel God's presence, even if we don't feel the unity, the magic, the bliss, the mystery, right? We have to push through that, and that divine service and that connection to God in prayer is itself the revelation. Because thus we are being the revelation. We are manifesting the revelation by transcending our need to have it be revealed in order to serve and to pray and to live as a giver in a state of divine service. We can only really feel the darkness after the light has shined within ourselves. We can only really feel the darkness after the light of God has shined within ourselves. Only then can the darkness be really felt. Only then can the darkness be really felt, as the darkness is the lack of God's light. This is a very core and central teaching within the Kabbalah, and it actually is a fundamental teaching in other parts of the Ashlag teachings that discuss the involution, how God's light came from a pure unity and came down the tree of life through the 10 Sefirot, into the manifest world, into Malchut, into the finite reality that we know of. And this teaching is core to that whole process, which is really simple in itself, right? That you can only really feel the darkness once you felt the light. If you haven't experienced God's light, if you haven't experienced some level of divine unity, divine union, then you don't really know what darkness is. You're just living in darkness, right? It's like does the fish know what water is? Because its whole life is in water, right? So if our whole life is in darkness, if we've not yet experienced the light of God, then we don't really know what darkness is. We can only really feel the darkness after the light of God has shined within ourselves, till we have experienced the light of God. Only then can the darkness really be felt. Then we feel the darkness, right? Because now the light has gone out. It was inside. We had it. We felt it. We were connected with it, and then it was removed. And then the light is removed, and then it's dark, right? Because now we have the relativity of experiencing light, and now really feeling the lack of that light, which is the darkness, which is the lack of God's light. Page 40. Those who are on the path of holiness are not yearning for the pleasure of God's light, but are yearning to reach the state of pure giving. Those who are on the path of holiness are not yearning for the pleasure of God's light, but are yearning to reach the state of pure giving. So this is a powerful teaching, and I understand what it's pointing to. And the path of holiness, Darchei Kedusha, that path is to, what he's pointing at is to transcend the need to experience God's light and the pleasure of God's light, but really what we're yearning towards is to reach a state of pure giving. But here, my personal take, and this is totally a personal perspective on this, is that really we get on the path because of the pleasure of God's light. We are drawn to that like a moth to a flame. Our whole entire beings are created with a sense of lack and a desire to receive. So the whole draw to the Kabbalah and to the spiritual path has to go along that same pathway. And so really the pleasure of God's light, the pleasure of spiritual union, which is the pleasure beyond measure, the greatest pleasure that we could possibly experience. All other pleasures are but a drop, a putrid drop compared to what the pleasure of union and feeling God's unity, and thus feeling your own purpose and the purpose of creation and being deeply one with that is the draw to go on this spiritual path for most of us. I mean, maybe if you're a holy, tzaddik, righteous person beyond, you're there, yearning to reach a state of pure giving, and you're like, I don't need the pleasure of God's light. I don't need the pleasure. But I think for most human beings, we're drawn towards this path because there's sort of a promise. There's a promise of this pleasure beyond measure. And the Rav is pointing to, yes, that is true, and he said it in other places, but really, once we get on the path of Kedusha, of holiness, we're no longer yearning for that pleasure of God's light, but we're yearning to reach a state of pure giving. And maybe there is in some way we have to kind of transcend that longing for the pleasure, and that once we focus on being a giver, in transcending that need for receiving pleasure, that actually ties us in. And maybe that's part of this teaching. That really the main focus should be on attaining a state of pure giving, becoming in likeness of form to the Creator, and not yearning for the pleasure. But again, I think it's very hard, being how we are structured and created, our DNA, to long for pleasure, to really imagine that that's not a part of our longing in this. And I think longing for the pleasure of union with God is a very holy longing, and it is not to be looked down upon. It actually is already a very elevated state. Maybe this is just pointing to a state that comes even more elevated than that. Let me know your thoughts if you have any. When we realize that all reality is pure compassion, we are redeemed. When we realize that all reality is pure compassion, we are redeemed. Wow. I'm not redeemed. I am not redeemed. It's hard. It's hard to be with this. It really, again, it's a transcendent state of consciousness, because when we look at the world, we see the opposite again. We don't see a world of compassion. We don't see a reality of pure compassion. We see a reality of hatred and division and fighting, especially now in our political climate of massive polarization, of massive side taking and massive pointing fingers at the other side and saying they're crazy, they're hateful, they're horrible, which is the disease that we are in right now. We're in a massive time of darkness and disease that is fueled through the realms of politics, and side taking and othering and exiling, condemning the other side, who are all our brothers and sisters and our extensions of ourselves. And we're so far in this diseased pathological culture that we're living in, and that's spreading like a disease across the globe. So when we look at that world, it's very hard to feel that that all reality is pure compassion. But again, this points to a transcendent reality, a reality like underneath all of, the facade, all of what we see going on the top. But underneath, at the roots of it, the reality is pure compassion, because the reality is pure love. God is all loving and God is all goodness, as we've said in previous passages. So when we can tune into that, when we can attune to and actualize that inside of ourselves, that all reality is pure compassion, is pure love, is God's infinite love just unconditionally pouring down upon us at every moment, forever and ever. When we realize that, we are redeemed. We're in a state of redemption. We're in a state of revelation. We're in union with the divine. Final passage. Awareness of God's exaltedness can elevate even the lowest situation. Again, similar vein. Awareness of God's exaltedness, awareness of the divine unity within all of creation, within all moments of time and extending beyond time. Awareness of that, awareness of God's awesomeness can elevate even the lowest situation, right? So even if we're mired in the depths of darkness and the depths of pain and the depths of polarization, if we are able to open a window into God's exaltedness, the magic, the mystery, the amazingness of creation, of being here, of being alive, of breathing, of speaking, of our hearts beating constantly and being a part of this awesome, awesome mystery of life. Even the lowest situation can be elevated. Okay, Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, with our work and our effort to connect, to move through the darkness, through the lack of revelation, and to, even when we can't see and feel God, to serve God and pray to God and open our hearts to God and to the underlying unity within all creation. May we be blessed to heal and awaken.